A badge of honor. Police officers and first responders wear badges to let their communities know they are here to protect and serve. But that's not how it feels today, and the stress of the job is taking its toll, taking lives through suicide and post-traumatic stress injury. A Badge of Honor podcast features the cast of the same name, Sam Horwitz and John Salerno. Sam, John, and the team offer the first responders workshops through their critical incident stress management teams and mental health liaisons to offer state-certified T-COLE credit programs that save lives. It's time to smash through the stigma. It's time to heal from your injury, and it's time to back our blue. Welcome to A Badge of Honor podcast. Here are your hosts, Sam Horwitz and John Salerno.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to A Badge of Honor podcast, sponsored by the OBBM Network with John and Sam. And you guys are probably wondering, okay, there's Sam. Where the heck is John? John is tending to some very important family business with his grandkids this evening. So you folks, you got me. So welcome, whether you're watching across social media or listening. Tonight is going to be a fantastic podcast episode, as it is every week, because we bring you everything that is first responder related in terms of healing and stress management, everything that you need to really take care of yourself and your mental health. And this month, we just got off Mental Health Awareness Month, which was May. And now we're in PTSD Awareness Month, which is this month. And just want to start a huge shout out to the city of Rowlett. That's where I live, my hometown in Texas. They are going to light our historic Rowlett water tower in teal, which is the national color for post-traumatic stress. And that's going to be happening. They're also going to have a ceremony on the 20th of this month. So just just a handful of days here coming up. And so look for some posts, maybe a live that we do that evening on our Facebook page. So welcome everybody that's watching on LinkedIn Live, on Twitter Live, and our regular subscribers to YouTube. Can't do this without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And, you know, when we talk about stress and stress management, a lot of what people hear and understand from the first responder aspect is, you know, that critical incident happens and it's what do we do next? And it's vital that first responders understand that, because you want to get in front of a critical incident when it happens, but there's definitely things that you have to do as an organization to help your men and women 2 months after, 3 months after. And so tonight we are talking all about that critical incident stress management with, he goes by Junk, but I told him I can't call him Junk on the show because he's not Junk. But we're talking with retired law enforcement officer and U.S. Army veteran Marc Junkerman. Hey, welcome, Marc, to the podcast.
Hey, Sam. Thanks for having me. You will come to that side like everybody else does eventually. So don't fret. It's truly okay. It's truly okay.
Yeah, our paths crossed, way back when in Maryland. You and I both have our law enforcement experience. And it just so happens that I was like, hey, Maryland was great, but Texas is better. We got to get you out here so you can experience the Texas lifestyle, if you will. And but it is great to have you on. And all these years later, reconnecting on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been great. That's why we're LinkedIn Live, folks, because it's an ability to connect in a different way that, LinkedIn was never like that. It was like, hey, this is the professional where the professional organizations go. And, you had to be all about, I'm looking for a job. But now we get to do this on a social media platform that's been great to us to connect. It has to be like 20 years. That's
Yeah.
how old we are, folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, since we're like doing the cool stuff that we're doing. So Mark, just tell everybody watching and listening about you.
Sure. Well, I have been to Texas a number of times. I just keep getting lost because when you tell me like I need to go to Houston, y'all are lying because usually it's like 3 hours away, like Houston. And, you say a city that could be anywhere within a 300-mile radius, first of all. So I'm a big Eagles fan because I grew up in Philly. So every time
we have to end the podcast right there.
listen,
That's
every
it. No.
TSA strip searches me every time I come into Love. I get it. I get it. We won that Super Bowl a few years back, and we've been touting that forever. But other than that, yeah. So I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. That's where I grew up. Was enlisted in the Army, and then was fortunate enough to go in the reserves as a commissioned officer. I basically left the military or chose to shorten that career. Spent about 10 years total active in reserve because of the law enforcement career. So I was very fortunate to be picked up in the mid 90s, early 90s, when it was kind of tough getting wow, look how the world has turned. It was really tough getting a law enforcement job at that time because of the number of people applying, which is kind of almost the opposite of what we're seeing recently here. And I ended up in a spot in Maryland, in a full service sheriff's office just north of Baltimore. And I have to say, I like everybody, you have your bumps in the road, but for the most part, I had a great 28-year career. I got to do a lot of cool stuff. I was a patrol guy. I was a detective. I did a little bit of undercover work. I was a SWAT guy. I, worked a couple federal task forces. And when I finished, I was able to go back to patrol, which was always where my heart is. I guess I'm old school with, to me, every call for service either starts or ends with a guy or girl in a blue or gray or khaki uniform. So, yeah, I'm very fortunate. I retired a couple years ago, and I moved down to the Maryland coastline to the beach. So I have my cool fake surfer hair now, even though I can't surf a lick. Eventually, I will get up on the board. I need a really big board. If I stood up, you'd understand why. But yeah. So during the course of that career, though, I was introduced to law enforcement behavioral health. First off, in a package some people call CIT. Which is crisis intervention team. Often we refer to that as a them course. How are we going to interact with the public? How are we going to support people in crisis and train our folks to understand how to respond better so we have a win-win situation? But during the course of that, we realized that we're doing everything for everybody else but ourselves. And that's kind of when I got involved with peer support and specifically with ICISF. So.
Yeah, that peer support component, it's been something. When did you start with that? What year?
So my first introduction to peer support was CIT was a little earlier. It was about 2005. I got in, let's say, law enforcement behavioral health in that arena. And in 2009 was my first introduction to peer support. And it actually wasn't through ICISF. It was a lady in Washington, D.C., Dr. Beverly Anderson. She was part of the D.C. shooting team. And she ran basically a training course on how to take care of each other to a certain extent. And that was my first introduction in 2009. That was.
Yeah. So you have seen peer support change and grow exponentially over the years into, what would you say, before you retired, what for you was the best part of peer support? Like, how did it mold you and shape you in order to help others?
A couple ways, probably, and the most blatant is I was one of those case studies, and literally am. There's a book, Doc Hewitt. I'll remember the title here as we go along. She wrote a book, and I'm a case study in the book that kind of tells you what happens when you're not taking care of yourself. So okay. I was one of those guys who was, I think the technical term is an alligator mouth and a hummingbird butt. I was making all the right noises. I was like the guru, literally, in the state, in the region, and I was corkscrewing into the ground because I had not embraced the fact that peer support is not just a policy. It's not just a checklist. It's not just a program. It is a way of life. It is a culture. And until I embraced the fact that, you know what, probably the person who needed my help the most was staring at me in the mirror. And it took me a rough road at one point to realize that. And it took people who I trusted to give me enough space to say, you know what, when you're ready, come talk to us. But we can't help you until you're ready. So that's the biggest thing I got out of peer support is understanding that, you know, this isn't just a theoretical model to me. This is something I lived. And I am not here today. I believe that literally without the help of some of these programs and some of the people. So that's my passion. The other part of that is, you know, I have between me and my wife, we have 3 kids. We have 2 nurses and a boy who's a police officer on the road. We have a brother-in-law who's a CO. I've got a corrections professional. I have friends. I have a really good friend right now. His son is downrange somewhere. We're not really sure where, but he's military and he's downrange somewhere. So I still have skin in the game, which is one of the reasons my wife is a retired law enforcement officer. We were talking before the podcast about her situation. You know, so what peer support, the best thing I got out of it was, first of all, I'm here. And second, I am in a position where I can do what I think old guys and ladies should be able to do. We should be the mentors that get out of the way and kind of start guiding the next generation. One of the things we don't do so well as law enforcement professionals, particularly, is succession plan. We have to be the ones to build the future that's going to outlast us. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, well, we're going to take our first break here and talk about that succession plan and focus on the "you're ready" moment, if you don't mind. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight to a Badge of Honor podcast. We got to take our first break. We will be right back.
Move freely, America, without medical restrictions or penalty. Without medical freedom legislation in place, our rights and freedoms are one vote away from being dissolved. Move freely, America, with one voice, without fear of retribution, achieving a common goal, medical freedom. We the people make our voices heard by connecting with state legislators and engaging a constitutionally compliant medical Bill of Rights for all citizens. Individually, change is improbable, but as an aggregate, attainable. It's time to act with one voice. My voice.
And my voice.
And my voice.
And my voice.
To protect our freedom, creating one voice that cannot be ignored. This requires your voice, too. Move Freely America. Go to movefreelyamerica.org to find a chapter near you. Plug in, donate, and help our legislators defend our God-given rights under the Constitution. Move Freely America. My voice.
And my voice.
And together with your voice, we're one voice that cannot be ignored. Donate today. movefreelyamerica.org.
Hey everybody, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast sponsored by the OBBM Network. Tonight we have retired law enforcement officer, U.S. Army veteran Marc Junkerman on the podcast tonight. He is an ambassador for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. That is a mouthful. I had to practice that, no joke, before tonight. And Marc, before we took a break, you were talking about your ready moment. And I want to focus on that for a second, because working in the veteran space, you know, in my nonprofit work, watching PTSD 911, which we'll talk about the movie that we're bringing to Garland here in a couple of weeks, is we as law enforcement, you know, we are always responding to somebody's worst day. We are answering the call. We were born to serve. It is ingrained in us. We are not wired to say, hey, you need to just pause here and focus on you. Okay. Totally foreign concept when it comes to, call it self-care, call it self-actualization, call it just awareness, you know, because we are bouncing from one thing to the other. I like to say sometimes we're like the ultimate multitaskers, even though in reality, multitasking is kind of a myth, but we learn to do it. We are good at it, for better or for worse. But we're we're very good when in the career, and also when the career ends, continuing to give of ourselves to the point where sometimes we get lost. So in your case, when you were saying, you went through this program, you love the peer support, but it was like, well, hey, until you're ready to focus on what's going on with you, you can't really help your peers. So what did that look like for you?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into a good segue into kind of like how I started and where we ended up. So I was tasked to, we were talking about, I was doing some behavioral health things. We start this peer support. I get tasked to run the peer support. I reach out to a couple different organizations. Dr. Anderson was one, and then I got introduced to the ICISF, which is the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. So I think most people will, if those people who are familiar with peer support and wellness and resiliency and sort of response to critical incident, will probably be familiar with something called CISM or CISM or CISD, a critical incident stress debriefing. So in short, the ICISF is the curator, let's call it, of a model that is called critical incident stress management, which is a comprehensive, integrated, systematic, multifaceted approach to helping, particularly first responders, is what it initially targeted. It's expanded a little bit out to different professions with similar stressors, but to help those folks sort of navigate through a critical incident to ensure that we have post-traumatic or post-incident growth versus post-incident injury or distress. So the CISD is a specific technique that is sort of the flagship. It was developed by a gent by the name of Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell. Jeff actually did the first one 51 years ago. ICISF has been around since 1989. So Dr. Mitchell partnered with another eminent doctor, George Everly, and they created this package, which includes an individual, let's call it an individual response to critical incident. How do I help a person one-to-one, and then more of a group response. So, this was backing up a little bit. They're headquartered in Maryland. So of course, this puts me on the ground floor. I start being me, which we'll get to that, 100 miles an hour, underwater, no stop, no food, no, just mission, keep going. So I am now totally immersed in the CISM thing. I am very fortunate to be able to meet these doctors, talk to these doctors, and frankly, be mentored by them. So, one of the reasons I'm an advocate for ICISF, I'm going to tell you, it's not the only model. And there's some parts of the model, and we maybe get to that later, that it does better than others. It is better in certain situations, particularly after is kind of what it's designed for. There is a front end component that most people forget about, but it is, we think of it as this is the response after a critical incident. I tell people, if somebody tells you they have the model, don't walk, run, because they're
Right.
there is no one model. It's like eating off the buffet. Everybody likes a little something different. But what ICISF brought, and why I got sort of really why I hitched my wagon, for lack of a better term, to it is 40 years of field experience, tons of actual documentation and evidence-based or at least peer-reviewed data on it. The bottom line is, if you're not using it, you're using something that's built off it, you're recognizing it, or you're comparing your model, what you're using, to CISM. It's the flagship. And I will argue that till the day is, till the sun comes up and down. So my thought was, if I am going to get on the ground floor and learn, why not start with the model and then move out? So we adopt that. We had a couple seminal incidents that sort of developed. My agency at the time in Maryland was kind of on the cutting edge. We kind of hit this initial push for wellness for our troops at just the right time. So we were getting a lot of traction. We were able to help a lot of the other agencies around us start to sow the seeds. And it's one of the things you'll see when you hear me talk, or in a lot of my, if I put something online, I talk about growing tall trees. The idea is we grow tall trees so everybody gets the shade. So even if I don't have a tree on my property, somebody else's tree shades me. So we were able to start that. The first seminal incident that really brought this and sort of my immersion into it was the unrest in Baltimore in 2015. After, for those of you who maybe not as vintage as me, there was an incident during an arrest where a man by the name of Freddie Gray died in police custody, and it triggered unrest within the city of Baltimore, which was unprecedented since the 60s. So we, as a state, had to respond. We were learning a lot of lessons about how do we deal with these type of situations. It was about 5 days of really touch and go. So after the situation basically goes back to, let's say, a baseline where, okay, we're no longer deployed. It just so happened that that's within a week after the stand down. ICISF, the foundation I work for, holds a biannual World Congress, and it's always in Baltimore. So they had this huge congress of people from all over the world who are experts in basically stress management, peer support, and how to deal with a critical incident. And we were sitting in Baltimore, and we were kind of saying, man, it's got to be horrible for the Baltimore City police officers and all the people who responded. And we kind of were looking around, and we thought, well, you know what? Don't we have literally the best people in the world right here? So we created what was called, we call it the World Congress model or the Baltimore model. And it was based on National Incident Management System. It was based on ICS. We used somebody at the state MEMA level, let's say, to coordinate to use as a clearinghouse. We used the state of emergency, so we didn't need MOUs and those things you would normally need. We were able to reach out to Baltimore City's, not just their leadership, but what we call the people that matter, the leaders, the icons of the department. We brought them in. We explained what we would like to do to help. And then we used their agency. Instead of having them deliver the services, we used them as navigators. And over a week, we brought 100 people in from 3 different countries and I think 8 different states. We delivered, I think, 72 roll calls in person. We were doing special operations units. We were doing briefings for command. We were bringing in civilians. So we as peers, under a clinical sort of guidance and supervision, using a clinical model. So we didn't, as I like to say, outrun our headlights. Stayed in our lane. The clinicians said, do this, don't do that, touch this, don't, which cops are great at, you know what I mean? Hey, walk there, don't do that, stand there, direct traffic, shut up. Yes, sir. Okay, I'm good. Hey, it's raining. Why you told me to stand here? Okay, well, good. Come here. That's what it's perfect for what we do. So what happened was we kind of created this model where we said, you know what, this idea that everybody has to have, a full-blown team and this and that, and people will only have what they can afford or what they're willing to buy into. So what we were able to do was develop this idea that we can actually mutually support each other like we do with any other critical incident. If we can bring in people to support, for unrest or for a tactical situation, why can't we do it for peer support to help each other on the back end? So this would really become important about a year later. 2016, on Ash Wednesday, I was actually in Annapolis, Maryland, which is the capital, and I was testifying on a bill for peer support to try to get legislation for confidentiality and to enhance the teeth of peer support and critical incident stress management. And I got a phone call that I had to come home. And it was from a friend, a captain called me, a guy who I was on the SWAT team with. And he said, Pat is shot and he's dead, and we think Mark's dead too. So a call for service emanated in a part of our county which is very suburban. I call it populated by what I call the angry minivan people. The got all the stickers on the back, and everybody's drinking a latte, and you know how that works. I know, but that's just whatever. So it's one of those like bedroom communities where everybody wants to live type thing. One of our deputies, a guy under my command, he backed up on a call for service. It wasn't his post. He was in a support role. Pat was by the call, and Pat's the kind of guy like we talked about. You don't drive by a call for service. Went in, call for service. The gentleman was the individual, I should say, was supposedly mentally ill, they thought. And as Pat went into a popular chain coffee shop, went back, engaged the gentleman. Hey, what can I do to help you? He was immediately shot in the head and died before he hit the ground. The subject fled out the back. He secreted himself in a car behind a nursing home. During the search, one of our other deputies, Mark, engaged him with gunfire. Unfortunately, he was laid back in a car. Mark was up on an angle. Bullet went up under Mark's vest, and he died. Our tactical unit that happened to be out and about at that moment then ended it and killed this individual. So it was a bad day. It was a bad day. You know, we lost 2 guys to gunfire in a span of 15 minutes. And you know, we've had our share of critical incidents, but we've been very fortunate that in 28 years, I've lost 7, I believe, total to line of duty death in some form or fashion. So we're familiar, but you're never familiar when you lose 2 guys in 15 minutes. And I remember the bosses coming and saying, well, you know, you're the SISM guy. You're the SISM coordinator. What are you going to do about it? And I said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to call some friends because we did this thing in Baltimore and I'm going to get us help. So that model we made in Baltimore, we actually implemented in my piece of the world. And then that became a regular sort of mutual aid. And that's, you know, one of the things that we've made our money on.
Wow, that's fantastic, Mark, the way that you handled that. And I think that's important. We got to take our next break, and I want to come back and touch on that. So, folks, you're listening to Retired LEO Marc Junkerman. He is the ambassador for ICISF. We will be right back after these quick messages.
Interested in starting a podcast or TV show? Worried about what you'll say and how to keep it engaging? Think you'd like to be a guest on podcast, radio, or TV shows? Hi, I'm Susan Hamilton, owner and founder of OBBM Network, and I would like to invite you to an OBBM media training to get the tools you need for a relaxed and polished performance you'll be proud to share. Our specialized training techniques include role play, voice training, and everything you need to deliver a confident, clear, and engaging interaction. Go to offbeatbusiness.com. Go to the calendar and register for a training that's convenient for you. Dates available now, 214-714-0495.
Everybody, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast with Sam and John. You got Sam and you got Mark in the house tonight. And we were just talking about, Mark, the critical incident that occurred with the loss of 2 of your friends, two of your guys that you supervised. And you said something that is so important, that when your command called you in and said, hey, you're the ICISF guy, you know, you're the critical incident guy. What are we going to do? You didn't jump into action. Again, we're trained to like, go. You paused and you said, you know what? I'm going to call my friends, my partners who do this. Why is that so important? And why does law enforcement need to know that?
Well, for a couple reasons. From a personal standpoint, you talked about that moment where I was like, things aren't going right. Well, you know, up to this point now, what you don't know in the background is I've been involved in numerous critical incidents. And one of them was the guy which you're not supposed to do. You go from a critical incident to then you're the person taking care of people in a critical incident. I had some baggage that I had not dealt with that had nothing to do with my law enforcement career that I didn't find out until, you know, I really sat down and talked to somebody. But I'm like a lot of folks. I'm going 900 miles an hour. See, Sam, I'm really good when it's hitting the fan. I'm really good when, the bullets are flying. I suck in the quiet spots. And every time I would get into one of those quiet spots, life would catch up to me. The ghost would start knocking on the door. So what do? You go and if you can't find a hot spot, you create one. And that's what I was doing. And thank goodness we had already sort of worked that model out, because the bottom line was I wasn't capable of helping if I wanted to. And it was at that point where I really, the grief of the job, not just the grief of loss, but the grief of the job caught up with me. The grief of life caught up with me, because when I look back, I hadn't cried, I hadn't grieved, I hadn't for 20 years. That was all bottled up, everything. It wasn't just one incident. It was this cumulative effect. And it nearly cost me. It did cost me dearly. It cost me some. I made some poor decisions at work. I tell people, beware of somebody who is a man or woman who is standing just on principle, because martyrs are scary. Because if all you have left is your principle, you probably don't have anything else to bargain with, or you're kind of like on that a self-destructive path. And that's where I was. And I was saying I made some bad decisions as a boss, and I made some bad decisions in my home life, and it cost me a marriage, and it put a little dent in my career. So the moment, it was shortly after this incident, this all came to a head. It ended up with me laying on my office floor with every worldly possession that I could have gotten out of the house in one carload, as I was blowing up a kid's raft that I was going to use as an air mattress. Because now, not only was my career spiraling out of control, I had just lost my marriage. That was the moment that I finally said enough was enough. And you know what? That was the moment I physically grieved for the first time in 20 years. And that's when I realized I had released the poison. I had opened a floodgate to be able to let sort of the sunshine in. I let the rain cloud rain on me. I've been running from a rain cloud forever. It finally caught me. It soaked me to the bone. And then I realized the sun was going to come out. That's why it's important to understand you got to take care of the me before the we. You cannot, the person who is most important in any scenario where you are going to be a helper is you. You have to be mission capable. You have to be combat effective. You have to be in a place of stability yourself, or you're not going to be able to sustain.
Yeah, and John and I talk about it in our workshops, especially when peer support always seems to come up, and when we're talking to folks that are just getting into it, we talk about, it's not peer supporting yourself, each other, yourselves. You look like, huh? Well, wouldn't we want to take care of each other after a critical incident? Yes, but you, as the trained peer supporter, are not peer supporting your own command or your own shift. It doesn't work that way. And thank God we have partners in there that, in the middle of the workshop, he'll educate and be like, why? And it's exactly what you just said. Because most of the time we are flying at 900 miles an hour, and we don't realize that when it happens in our own station, on our own turf, we have to let go.
Right.
We have to, you are going to receive the peer support. You are not going to be the lead person, because you have to take care of yourself in this. And I think a lot of departments, are kind of missing that, because they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be peer supporters. This is going to be awesome. And it's something new and exciting, and it's shiny, and we're good at it. Right. We're really good at that. But it's either like, I went to the bathroom when they were talking about not supporting each other, or we get to that point where it's like, we're so good at lending an ear that we forget about that all important topic. And I know you guys cover it in your teaching, that compassion fatigue.
Sure. Yeah. Self-care, compassion fatigue. And you know, I'm a firm believer now as we evolve and you know, some other incidents that we can chat about that kind of also even push this more front end. I'm a firm believer that, you know, I believe it's Admiral McCraven talks about every morning you get up and make your bed. You know, you got to have a small win. Every day you have a purpose. Then you take ownership for yourself. And once you help the me, you can help the we. Now I'm accountable to and for my peers. This idea that peer support is, you know, a group of people who have a jacket, you know, and a handout. Don't get me wrong. I'm not down, but that's important. You have to have the training. In my mind, you have to have the training. You also have to have clinical support. I think they go hand in hand. But this idea of culture is it's that idea of your battle buddy, your ranger buddy, whatever you call it. Everybody needs to be a peer. Everybody needs to be a peer all the time. And it's not just about your headspace. It's about, hey, around here, we don't do that because it makes us look bad. Hey, around here, we wear our body armor, we wear our seatbelt. Hey, and around here, I spend more time with you than your family does. You ain't right, and I need to know why. And it's not because I want to necessarily get into your head and fix you or whatever. It's because we depend on each other. I care about you because you're my partner. I do this job, more importantly, not just to help everybody else, but because I stand with you side by side every night. You're my partner. I depend on you. And I need to know if you're not right, for lack of a better term. That impacts what I do. So that's part of this challenge, is breaking down these kind of traditional ideas about what it means to be a cop and start figuring out what it means to be a partner. If we can get to that point, you're going to realize that some of the things that maybe we were taught old school, let's say, for lack of a better term, this is what it means to be a cop. They're probably not only past their shelf life, they were probably dead wrong in the first place. And I know that's a whole nother conversation, but this is about looking at the model we have and going, you know what? You can't keep painting over rust. When do we tear it down and kind of build up from a new foundation? And that's the point that I got to personally, which then led me to do what I do now with ICISF, which is...
Boy, yeah, that is so well said. You can't keep painting over rust. You know, we're going to dive into the specifics of ICISF when we come back from our next break. We'll be right back, everybody.
Hi, welcome to Heroes in Action. I'm Ray Amanat, founder and creator of this training system. I originally made it so that everyone can train for free. We have programs for kids, for women, families, and businesses. I'm an author, speaker, and educator on everything that has to do with violence and bullying prevention education. If you'd like more information about who we are and what our programs are, please go to our website at heroesinaction.us or give me a call if you have any questions at 727-314-2534. We hope to see you here to train.
Everybody, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast here on the OBBM network. We are talking with Marc Junkerman, and you know, right before we took a break, you said the specifics of ICISF and how everything's laid out. Let's talk specifics about ICISF. I'm going to put up the website right now. Super easy, ICISF.org for all of you folks that are listening. And when you get on there, it's kind of like, oh, wow, you guys do a lot. Where do I click first? I want to learn something. Take us through.
Yeah. So ICISF.org is the hub. If I was going to start at one sort of, let's say, click in the drop down menu, it would be the resources. ICISF again is traditionally known as a model that has a number of services that you can deliver to first responders who have been impacted by some sort of incident at different times and junctures within a certain period surrounding that incident. So either directly after 3 or 4 days after, 2 weeks after. There's a whole bunch of different models and training, and it's based on a clinical sort of approach where peers and clinicians work hand in glove. Okay. But what I tell people is now, particularly ICISF is also evolving, and that's where I kind of come in as the ambassador. When we talk about this CISM, when we talk about this response, what we often forget, even those of us who have been trained in it, this model is built on another model, or it has some roots with another model that was developed by Johns Hopkins, Dr. Everly being one of the doctors on that. And it's called the 3R model. And it's a resiliency model. And what it talks about is resistance, resiliency, and recovery are the 3 stages. So the resiliency and the recovery, that's what we kind of focus on. What we forget about is the resistance. And resistance in this instance is what I call self-inoculation. It's what we're doing left of bang, to quote, a book that's out there. But I think it's Van Horn is the author. There's a book, Left of Bang, but it's an old military term. What are we doing before the incident happens? Those of us who've been around, Gordon Graham, who's talked for years about front-end inoculation and risk management. This is where the resources come in. Why? Why is that important? Why do you go to that page first? Because before you decide you want to use the CISM model, you should actually see what else is out there. You should actually read some of the articles that are posted under the resources. The Lighthouse Health and Wellness app, I have it right here on my phone. That's they're one of our resource partners. They're one of our strategic partners. There's First Help, which talks about the suicide prevention. There's Warriors Rest, which is another resource partner. First responder conferences, Sean Thomas, what a resource out there. And again, First Help with Joe Willis, Mike Murata, the Javi and Kathy
Bustos.
Yep. Sorry, Javi. Sorry, Kathy. What fabulous people out there. So that's important to go there first, because I'm going to tell you, before you decide to spend your troops' time and treasure, make sure that you are picking a model that's going to work for you. You should have a model that is going to fit your agency's, your organization's capabilities, their funding, the approach. Don't try to put the square peg in the round hole. I see that a lot. Why are you using CISM? Because it's the best model. But is it the best model for you? And I think that's a huge starting point, which is why ICISF has not only built that resource page and built these resource partners, but is also looking at, we're doing some more, let's call it front end. The courses I tend to teach or present are more management based on the front end. And they ask you, why are you using the model? And if you are going to use the model, how do you strategically plan to make CISM, wellness, peer support part of your overall mission, and not just this outlier that sits here as a program because you either have to check a box or because it's the flavor of the week. So I think that's really important to, as an organization and as a person, to ensure that you are creating an environment where whatever approach you choose or whatever models you choose can actually thrive and don't just die on the vine, because it's like an untended garden. Once you plant seeds, you're not going to get your fruit and veggies unless you're out there every day weeding the garden, water, and doing those things. So
we know that there are still organizations, departments, if you will, out there that it's like with sports injuries. Oh, that's not going to happen here, right? Sure. And then something does, and then you have command staff that are picking up the pieces, and oh my gosh, somebody mentioned ICISF. Well, just call them. So if you, and I'm sure you've dealt with this, so they get a hold of you, Mark, and now they're, we'll call it behind the 8 ball, right?
Right.
What's your step number 1 recommendation?
So the first thing is like anything else, it's when we do that scene size, when we assess the situation first, let's assess the risk of harm. What is there some kind of immediate critical incident that happened? Are people Have people suffered from a critical incident? The first thing we want to do, and what the foundation, when the foundation first started, there was a deployment, let's call, element to it. Not so much anymore for a lot of reasons. So one of the first things I would do is, if you don't have a team, who around you has a team? Who have you made friends with, or who can we plug you in? Let's take your hand off the hot stove before we do anything else. Let's kind of stop the burning. So the first thing is to make sure that whatever resources your agency might need, let's get that to them first. Okay. From there, it's time to slow the tempo. And a lot of this comes down to a strategic approach, something that I call SOAR. First thing is, I want to talk to that boss, and I want to understand what the mission of that agency is. Not just, and that's it, well, you're a law enforcement agency, this is what you do. Yeah, but no. I mean, coming from a federal law enforcement agency, not just the mission, but that commander's intent and how you're actually going to be able to execute certain things are different. One of the first things I like to go in and ask the bosses is, what's your why? And they'll say, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, why do you want this? And most, thank goodness, are, I want to take care of my troops. I want to help them. But every once in a while, you get somebody who says, because I want to be a director, I want to be a chief, or there's a legislative thing I need to do, or I'm going to look bad. And you know what? 5 years ago, I would have been like, oh, you are just a nasty, horrible person, and you don't get this.
It's a reality.
It's the reality. And Sam, the mistake I've made so many times is, first of all, there's a difference between being right and righteous. You can be right and maintain a relationship or friendship. You can have a dialogue, a discourse, a discussion, and disagree and say, you know what, let's agree to disagree. When you become righteous, you're not only telling that person that they're wrong, you're telling them they're stupid, they're ugly, they have a bad haircut, all those things. And unfortunately, we being the collective we who are trying to help, we often have so much passion, we forget that, I can tell you why this is so important to me, and I did, but I'm not selling it to me, I'm selling it to you. I got to find out why is it important to you? And that's the approach that, as I've matured, let's say, we try to take. So I'm going to go into that boss and I'm going to say, what's the why? Why do we want to do this? Okay, we know your reasons. Now, what's the orientation? Two things about orientation. What's the terrain I'm operating in? We want to be not just culturally competent, which we hear a lot about. We want to be organizationally competent. What's that mean? The way you police in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is totally different than the way you're going to police in Philadelphia, Mississippi. So even though we're saying, well, we're all cops, well, but are you? Are you a police officer? Or are you a deputy sheriff? Are you a sheriff's department or a sheriff's office where somebody is elected? Are you a federal agent? Are you an 1811? Or are you an 1801? The culture is huge. We then want to look at what the plan is. You have to win by design, not by default. I like luck as much as anybody, but I want to be the house, not the sucker throwing my chips on the table. And then once we have a plan, we want to look at resiliency. Resiliency in this case is, can we do it more than once? Is it doing what we think we're going to do? And do we have metrics to justify? That's the approach I'm going to take with a boss.
Wow, that is a mouthful, but oh my gosh, breaking it down so that people can actually hear and it works, right? It takes away the I don't know factors, like, oh, thank you so much. We have talked about so much today. We got to take our last quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to wrap it up with Marc Junkerman from ICISF, retired law enforcement officer and peer support extraordinaire. Be back, everybody. Hang on.
To the Health Engineer Show. I'm Clint Bucoy, the Health Engineer, right here on the Offbeat 50.
Hi, I'm Larry Corkamp, this is
Hi, my name is Susan Hamilton, and you're watching Offbeat.
Hi, this is Doreen Milano. Welcome to Big Ideas Small Business, where we will talk to Terry Arjala.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast sponsored by the OBBM Network. Marc, you have explained peer support and how to do it right. You have explained ICISF's model. For anybody listening, if they want to start a peer support, if They are just really confused over providing the best in terms of CISM care. How can people reach you as an ambassador for ICISF?
So I know we're coming up on the hard stop. You can always go to the website. There's tons of phone numbers. There's tons of you can call any of the phone numbers at the office and ask for me. I will. You're more than welcome to have my phone number. If there's a way to put that out,
Just say it.
240-423-8203. That's my number. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, 13 other things that I don't know how to work, but the kids do. So just reach out, Google me. I don't care. If you reach out, we'll do our best. I might not have all the answers, but I'll make something up that sounds good until we find out the answers.
Well, look, you've got a memorable name, all right? If you Google Junk, you're not going to find Mark, but Junkerman, you'll find Mark, M-A-R-C. And thank you so much for sharing this phenomenal, fantastic information, for also sharing your story and your why behind getting into ICISF and why it's so important, that model. Guys, go to the website because, like Mark, like you said, there is a yearly big conference that you guys have.
Yeah, it's biannually, but there's a lot of other supporting conferences. And it's set up like a cottage industry. Let's say you can request trainings, and there's ways we can get you what you need. And if they don't have it, we'll build it for you. That's part of what we can do. So
that's a mic drop moment. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. We'll be in touch. Appreciate your time.
Sam. Be safe.
Thanks, you too. Wow, what an incredible podcast tonight with Marc Junkerman. He is, like I said, if you are wondering about peer support, if you're wondering about how to bring the CISM model to make sure it's right for you, reach out to Mark. Go to ICISF.org. And like you said, there's a way to reach out to him directly there and a lot of other folks. Hey, we have got a jam-packed rest of the month. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're here every Monday live at 5 with you on the podcast. Don't forget about the important touch points. It is PTSD Awareness Month. And if you go to abadgeofhonor.com, we have got some special events coming up. On Father's Day, we are doing Walk the Bridge across the world. It is global. So you can visit our website. Better yet, you want to know more about Walk the Bridge and how we do it and how you can actually create a Walk the Bridge in your own backyard. Go to walkthebridge.org. It is our version of peer support. It's a Badge of Honor's initiative. Like I said, we are doing it across Texas, across the nation, and across the world. I think we're ready to launch our 4th event, Walk the Bridge, in the UK. So you want to go to walkthebridge.org. On the 20th of this month, we have got a special event, again, with the city of Rowlett, recognizing June as PTSD Awareness Month. Are going to light up the historic water tower in teal, which is the national color for post-traumatic stress disorder. And then on the 24th of this month, that's the 24th of June, 5:30 p.m. doors open. It is PTSD 911. You can see the movie poster behind me. Our partner, Conrad Weaver, who is the film's creator, producer, everything. He made it, he brought it into existence, and it chronicles PTSD from a first responder's viewpoint. Why is that important? Not only for us as first responders to understand each other, but it's also important for the community to understand sometimes why we are the way we are. So it is open to the public. Please come out to the historic Plaza Theater in Garland, Texas on Saturday, June 24th, 5:30 p.m. doors open. We'll have resource tables available to you, and we invite the community to be part of this special screening. Come spend an evening with us. We'll have an all-important panel after the screening of the film, so you can ask questions the way you want to ask them from our panelists, who are actually folks that appear in the movie. Guys, for all of the first responders out there, we are praying for you every single day. It is a tough time out there, and we here at a Badge of Honor podcast, we have got your back. For all of our veterans out there, thank you for putting your lives on the line out there, for protecting us, for fighting for our freedom so that we can do shows like this every single week. And for our active personnel around the world, thank you for keeping us safe, our shores right here. Again, first responders, reach out to ICISF.org if you want to build peer support as well as successful CISM. And until next week, this is Sam minus John tonight. He will be back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you tuned in on YouTube. Click on the subscribe button. Follow us across all social media platforms, including Getter, including MeWe. We are out there, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Have a great night, everybody. Take care. Be safe.
A Badge of Honor podcast is produced for the OBBM Network podcast and protected under copyright law. For content permissions, please submit your request to abadgeofhonor.com on the content page. For OBBM Network programming information, please call 214-714-0495 today.